Wow, that's so cool. What is that?
Oh, that's actually called a draconoid meteorite, Asher.
Wow.
It's absolutely amazing, isn't it?
It's so cool. When I watch things like this, it's really easy to see God's work in the universe and believe in God. And yet, there are other moments where I do have some doubts sometimes. And I think doubts are a normal part of life. Even from the beginning of time, Satan's been saying, "Did God really say?" But how would you answer the question if someone was struggling with doubts, if someone said, "How can we know God exists?"
Actually, that is such a good question. It's probably the most important question that a person can ask. But it's also difficult to answer because God is spirit, so you can't exactly put him in a test tube and show him to somebody. It's a little bit like the wind or air. We can't see the air, but we know it's there. Or if you see a tree moving, you don't say, "Wow, what a super hyperactive tree that is." You know that the wind is causing that. And so when you look at the universe around us, you see God's handprint on the universe, and you feel like God really does exist.
That's so true, because when I look at God's intentionality in the universe, it's easy to see that it's so perfectly designed to all work together, that the design means that there must be some kind of designer, you know?
You're absolutely right. In fact, there's an argument that we use, and it's called the design argument, that basically says that. It says that the universe has design, so there has to be a designer. And there's so much order in the universe that we could actually say that it works like clockwork, and someone must have put it together intentionally.
Wow, that's really cool.
If, for example, you had a watch on your desk, and you look at this, there's two things that that'll come to mind, sort of who made it or who put it there.
Yeah.
We don't normally go to the, this watch created itself theory. You think about a watch and you think about the cogs that need to be in place and what all it does. So to assume that there was an explosion that took place in a factory that had some glass, some plastic, pieces of leather and metal, and that this explosion with the paint just going up all over the place, it all landed in the right place, and that the numbers in sequence ended up on a face that had hands that would go across it with a piece of glass to cover the surface and a leather strap. To expect that to come out of an explosion is a really difficult ask. It takes so much faith to believe something like that. And so when there is a watch, you recognize the existence of a watchmaker. And a watch is so much less complicated than this earth or even a single person on the earth. And we're saying intelligent design is the result of an intelligent designer, and our God is that intelligent designer. If we take the sun as an example, you have a look at the placing of the earth in terms of the distance from the sun. If it was any closer to the sun, then life on earth would be incinerated. And if it was further than where we are from the sun, we'd freeze to death. We wouldn't be able to sustain life. So even in things like that, you can see that there is intentionality, purpose, calculation in our universe. If you take something as complex as an eye, an eye is really absolutely amazing in all that it does to enable us to see. To begin with, you've got a lens that has to either expand or contract so that the image or the light rays that come in focus at the right point on our retina. That you've got the iris that also opens or closes. When there's a lot of light out there, it closes so that you don't have too much. When there isn't enough light out there, it opens to allow more light in. And then those light impulses will either travel through cones when there's too much light or rods when there's less light. And the cones have the ability to send a message through nerve impulses into the brain that will tell you what color the object is that you're seeing. And so you can work out the shape of it. You can tell how far away from you it is just by looking. And to have all of that coded into a language that the brain can decode and have you understand is absolutely amazing. Stuff like that can't just develop themselves or
That's
evolve
true.
themselves.
It's so true, because I'm just even thinking of something like a house. A house needs an architect who designs it, blueprints, all of that. A house doesn't even happen by chance. But people will then often say, if there's a divine designer, an intelligent designer, then who designed him? Who created God, essentially? What would you say to that?
Okay, that's a very good question, and we sometimes use what we call the cause argument to address this. So basically what it says, and this is scientific, that for every effect there is an adequate cause. And then for every cause is an effect. But as we look at that, the law of cause and effect states that there is a universe, something must have caused it. So we're saying that God caused the universe. Usually the next question is going to be, so who made God? But if you answer that question, then the next question is going to be, so who made whatever made God? And then who made that? You're always going to go back to a starting point. And if we're going to get really technical, let's call that starting point the uncaused cause. And so whether it be just us looking at God and saying God is the uncaused cause, or whether it be an evolutionist saying, no, the dot is an uncaused cause. Someone has to do that.
What do you mean a dot?
Okay, so let me just try to briefly explain the theory of evolution. Evolution says that human beings evolved from animals, that the animals evolved from plants, that the plants evolved from bacteria, that the bacteria evolved from molten rock. The molten rock came from an explosion of two suns just colliding with each other, and one of them just spinning off into the planets that we have. And as you think about this explosion in these two suns, we're saying, where did that come from? And the answer that we often get in biology textbooks is there was a dot that is the size of a full stop on the page that exploded into this universe.
So where did the dot come from?
That's an excellent question. So whether you believe in God or whether you're an evolutionist, you still have an uncaused cause, even if it is a dot.
Wow, I've never thought of that. If you just work backwards far enough, there has to be that just one thing that was not created, that always was.
Right.
And that's the first cause, or the uncaused cause. I feel very clever when I say that, uncaused cause. But that we have a choice to believe that first thing that always was either matter, a dot or a universe itself, or God.
Well, let me just say something else on that. There are some people who believe in an eternal universe, that they say that it was always there. But the scientific difficulty with believing in an eternal universe is when we look at it, the universe that we live in, when we look at how it works, we recognize that it operates on energy. The energy comes from the sun or the stars that are in the universe. And given time, the sun actually gets smaller as the energy moves away from it. So an eternal universe has to have a sun that never runs out of energy, that never gets smaller, because if it always existed, it would have run out by now. There'd be no energy coming from the sun. But the other thing that this helps us to understand is that if the evolution process started millions and millions of years ago, then the sun would have been so big and emitting so much heat that life on Earth would have been incinerated as soon as it began.
Wow. That's so interesting. Wow. I was just wondering, so we've got the intelligent design argument. We've got the cause argument. Are there any more arguments for God's existence?
Actually, there are many, many more arguments. There's so many things that help you understand that there has to be a God behind life. But let me just talk about one of them, and this is what we call the moral argument. And basically, it questions how is it that every person that you meet has got a conscience, of an internal understanding of what is right and what is wrong. Now, it is possible for some people to have their consciences seared, but bottom line, very basically, human beings have an understanding of what is right and what is wrong, and it doesn't matter which culture on earth that you go to. And the understanding of what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior is fairly universal. And the question is, where did that concept come from? And we're saying God was the one who gave us an understanding of right and wrong. And we know that it is not something that evolved, it doesn't come out of the evolution process, because what evolution teaches is survival of the fittest.
Sure.
And that basically says there are no laws, you do whatever you have to do to survive. But here we come in as human beings and we're saying, no, we don't kill, we don't rape. We've got societies that say these things are wrong. And so we're recognizing that God is the one who put that understanding there.
That's a really good point, because Christians, non-Christians, we all have this ability to recognize evil or good, and we can ignore that, and that's what you mean by searing our conscience. If we continually ignore our conscience, it doesn't work so much for us anymore. But I was just thinking of my dad, and told me this story about when he was about 4 years old. His parents weren't Christian. He didn't grow up knowing about God, but this person who practiced witchcraft walked into the room with his family, and without knowing anything about witchcraft, without knowing anything about God, he just had this sense of like, this is wrong, there's something not okay here. And he said he went and ran and hid under a desk because he was scared, but he also knew it was wrong. And I mean, it's not a nice story, but I think that's really cool that someone who didn't learn anything about God just had this this thing inside of him to be able to recognize evil and to be able to recognize good. So that's, I think what you're saying is that if we are able to recognize good and evil, who taught us that? Right. We just knew it from when we're little, and God put that inside of us. If I just summarize what you taught me today, is just that there's so much intentionality in the universe that it's definitely been designed, and if there's a design, there has to be a designer.
That's right.
Okay, and then you've also said that there has to be just one thing that was not created and that always was, and we have the choice to believe that that one thing is just a dot or matter or the universe itself.
Correct.
Or an intelligent being who created us, an uncreated God who loves us.
Right.
And then the third thing is, how do we all know what's right and wrong? There must be a God who put that inside of us. Wow, that's really helpful to know. I'm excited to research more and look into this more. Thank you so much, Pastor Kurt.
Oh, such a pleasure. Have a great day.